Under the bright chandeliers of the Oval Office, cameras clicked as President Donald Trump approached the lectern, his expression firm yet composed. It was a rare moment of quiet confidence amid the turbulence of Middle East politics. Facing a group of reporters, Trump's tone was measured but optimistic. When asked how confident he was that the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas would hold, he replied with a calm certainty, "I think it will hold, yes. I think it will hold. Everybody's tired of the fighting." Those words, simple but deliberate, captured a sense of exhaustion that had spread across the region. After 2 years of relentless warfare in Gaza, the ceasefire had finally taken effect. The guns had fallen silent, at least for now. The US president was confident that this fragile truce, mediated by Egypt, Qatar and Turkey, could become something more durable, a stepping stone toward peace. Trump confirmed that he would be traveling over the weekend to Israel and Egypt, both pivotal in the mediation process. The upcoming visits signaled not just a diplomatic gesture, but a high-stakes bid to consolidate a peace deal that many thought impossible only weeks ago. Israel had officially announced the enforcement of the ceasefire earlier that Friday, and already scenes of cautious return were unfolding across Gaza. Tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians began making their way northward, walking amid ruins, carrying whatever belongings had survived. The journey was both a physical and emotional one, as families sought to reclaim homes that, in many cases, no longer stood. In Khan Yunis, entire blocks were flattened. AFP footage showed residents stepping through rubble-strewn streets, searching for traces of the lives they once had. The first phase of the ceasefire agreement, according to officials, included the release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza within 72 hours. The timeline was critical, each hour a test of mutual restraint. For Israel, the agreement followed weeks of intensified air and ground operations aimed at seizing Gaza City, the territory's largest urban hub. Now, with the guns silent, Israel's civil defense teams began pulling bodies from the debris, a grim reminder of what it had taken to reach this point. From the Pentagon, US Special Presidential Envoy Steve Witkoff relayed operational updates, confirming that the Israeli army had completed the first phase of its withdrawal to the Yellow Line. He added, "The 72-hour period for the release of hostages has begun." These words, verified by defense channels, underscored Washington's close monitoring of every step in the ceasefire process. On the Israeli side, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed hope that his country would soon celebrate a day of national joy with the return of the hostages. His tone reflected a mixture of cautious optimism and political relief. The hostage crisis had placed immense pressure on his leadership, with protests in Tel Aviv demanding both the release of captives and a definitive end to the bloodshed. In Hostages Square, yellow ribbons fluttered in the breeze, symbols of both grief and endurance. Families of those held in Gaza gathered beneath trees adorned with photographs of their loved ones. Each face represented a personal story, a family suspended between anguish and hope. As the situation stabilized, Israeli defense forces released footage showing their troops repositioning along designated lines of withdrawal. Soldiers stood against the dim horizon, preparing for what the army called a defensive reconfiguration. No gunfire, no explosions, only the distant sound of engines and the rustle of sand as armored vehicles rolled back. The images carried a sense of uneasy calm. For Palestinians, the ceasefire marked the beginning of yet another uncertain chapter. The roads leading into northern Gaza were choked with people, families carrying children, food and water in battered containers. There was relief, but also disbelief. After so much destruction, few could imagine what peace might look like. AFP TV footage captured faces, some smiling, others blank, as if unsure how to react to silence after years of constant noise. In Washington, Trump's confidence seemed both political and personal. This ceasefire, after all, was being interpreted by some as a vindication of his administration's Middle East strategy, one that emphasized deal-making over traditional diplomacy. The president's upcoming visit to Israel and Egypt was expected to highlight American mediation as the decisive factor in halting the war. Critics, however, warned that without addressing the deeper humanitarian crisis and the political status of Gaza, the truce might prove temporary. Trump's words, "Everybody's tired of the fighting," were being quoted across newsrooms worldwide. To his supporters, they resonated as an empathetic acknowledgement of human fatigue. To his detractors, they sounded like an oversimplification of a decades-long conflict. Yet for millions in Gaza and Israel, the sentiment rang true. Both sides had paid an unbearable price. As daylight broke over Gaza's shattered skyline, civil defense teams moved through the ruins, uncovering the bodies of those who had not survived the final week of bombardment. Israel's withdrawal, though partial, allowed humanitarian convoys to enter from Egypt through the Rafah crossing. Aid agencies rushed in supplies, food, fuel and medical kits, while coordinating with Israeli and Egyptian forces to avoid violations of the fragile truce. Qatari officials, speaking from Doha, confirmed their continuing role as guarantors of compliance alongside Turkey. Both nations had invested heavily in ensuring that communication lines between Israel and Hamas remained open, even as distrust lingered. A senior Qatari diplomat described the ceasefire as an outcome of exhaustion rather than agreement, a phrase that perfectly encapsulated the mood on the ground. In Jerusalem, Israeli media outlets debated the cost of the operation. The war had left thousands dead, billions in damages, and an uneasy public divided over whether the objectives had been achieved. Netanyahu's coalition, once seen as politically unshakable, was facing scrutiny not just for its handling of the war, but also for its promises of post-war reconstruction. In Gaza, local radio stations powered by generators broadcast messages of return. Citizens were urged to reclaim whatever could be salvaged, but also to proceed cautiously as unexploded ordnance still littered many residential areas. Civil engineers from the Palestinian Red Crescent described entire districts as beyond repair. For Trump, the diplomatic momentum was an opportunity. With his Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio coordinating closely with regional partners, the administration sought to position the United States as the indispensable broker of peace. The president's decision to personally visit Israel and Egypt was intended to underscore that commitment and perhaps to carve his own legacy as a peacemaker. Yet, even as Washington celebrated, analysts remained skeptical. Could this ceasefire really hold? Past truces between Israel and Hamas had lasted weeks or months at best before collapsing into renewed violence. But this time, there was a subtle shift in tone. Both sides were exhausted. Both faced internal pressures to stop. And unlike previous attempts, this ceasefire had been backed by a coordinated US-Egypt-Qatar framework, reinforced by on-the-ground verification from the United Nations. As night fell across Gaza, the air was heavy with the sound of silence, a silence that felt both foreign and fragile. From the rooftops of Rafah to the broken streets of Beit Lahia, candles flickered in the dark. Families gathered, whispering prayers that the ceasefire would last through the night. Back in Washington, Trump's day ended with a short message to the press corps as he left the White House. "It's a good start," he said, before stepping into his motorcade. The convoy rolled out toward Andrews Air Force Base, where the presidential aircraft waited to take him eastward, toward a region still reeling from war, but finally, momentarily, at peace. The story of this ceasefire, of weary fighters, displaced families, and cautious diplomats, is far from over. But for the first time in years, there is a window, however narrow, through which hope might pass. As Trump's plane prepares to land in Tel Aviv, the world watches closely. The next 72 hours, those that will determine whether hostages return home and whether the ceasefire holds, may well define not only the fate of Gaza, but also the legacy of the American president who believes, simply yet powerfully, that it will hold.